Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has left the White House early this morning after a bitter exchange with US President Donald Trump. The two leaders were speaking ahead of a bilateral meeting when the conversation devolved into an extraordinary verbal spat. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by senior lecturer at Flinders University, Jessica Jinawa. Very good afternoon to you. What did you make of it?
Yeah, well, this was a very shocking sort of event that we saw in terms of the interactions between not just President Trump and President Zelenskyy, but it was really the interjections from Vice President J.D. Vance that were very surprising and out of order with what we would typically expect. I think there are a few things to take away from this. Firstly, when President Trump and his administration say peace and they say a ceasefire, what they're really talking about is Ukraine freezing the territorial line where it currently stands between Russian-occupied areas and Ukrainian-controlled territory, which would essentially mean giving up 20% of what Ukraine would consider to be its sovereign territory. So that's basically delivering a massive victory to President Putin. So that's really what we're talking about when Trump says we need a ceasefire, we need peace, frozen along current lines. The other thing I think that's important about what happened is that it shows that I think President Trump, Vice President Vance, and Trump's administration don't in any way consider Ukraine to be an equal player with the United States. So the way that President Zelenskyy was treated as a counterpart who should be on the same level politically as another president was not the way that you would treat an equal counterpart. So the way they both spoke to him, the fact that J.D. Vance interjected, shows that they're really seeing Ukraine as more of a small or middle power country who does not need to be considered or taken into account in the same way they're clearly taking Russia into account.
What do you think the Kremlin would have made of it?
I think that President Putin would be quite pleased. He'll be quite happy with what he saw because it's showing that President Trump is publicly and quite clearly aligning himself and pushing for what would be in Russia's interests. So essentially the type of deal that he's talking about in terms of political settlement is one that's going to greatly advantage Russia in terms of territorial control, as I mentioned, but also the way that President Zelenskyy is being treated with quite a lack of respect, lack of protocol is something, again, that President Putin would be quite pleased to see, as he himself would also not consider Ukraine to be an equal player with the United States or with Russia.
Australia and all of Europe's leaders have rallied around behind President Zelenskyy. It creates a very interesting world dynamic now. Is there any way back for America and Ukraine in this?
Well, that's exactly right. I think that another lesson to take from this is that really European countries, other countries around the world, countries that want to see certainly the war to end, but they wanted to see it end in a way that is not going to severely disadvantage Ukraine after they've been fighting in a full-scale war for 3 years with massive costs in terms of loss of life and etc. So I think for countries around the world, importantly European countries, but also Australia, Canada and others, the lesson to take from this is that the US is not going to be the one to lead on any kind of equitable political settlement. They're aligning themselves, Trump's administration are aligning themselves more strongly with Russia's preferences than with Ukraine's perspective. And I think partly the reason that they're doing that is, as far as we understand, the sort of core, let's say 20% of the US population, domestic population, that are really Trump's core supporters, the, if you will, sort of make America great again contingency. So those people seem to really prefer Russia's perspective over Ukraine's. So I think what we're seeing from President Trump, but also from J.D. Vance, is that they're trying to play primarily to a domestic audience, to their core supporters. And they're sending the message, we are not going to align with Ukraine and we're not going to align with what are clearly Ukraine's preferences and Ukraine's interests in the war.